very excited for today's topic at hand. I am joined today by Dr. Ruth Nutting, Director of Clinical Programs at Evolve MD. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here this morning.
I would love if we could just sort of walk through your professional experience and sort of what that's been like.
It was really just, all of these, what I would consider to be interests morphing with the experience I was having both via, my general courses as an undergraduate student, as well as my work within a healthcare setting that really started to identify my initial interest. Additionally, there was a personal component as well. My sister really did suffer from severe bipolar. So I saw, as a family member, the impact of mental health and what it does not only to the individual, but to the family system. In 2019, 7% of the U.S. adult population experienced symptoms of major depressive disorder, and now that is at 24%. We've also seen an increase in severity of symptoms by about 15% as well. So we're seeing symptoms of major depressive more, and these symptoms are certainly increasing in severity. We need to do something as a society, as mental health providers, because we're not just seeing it within our adult populations, we're also seeing it within our pediatric populations.
Right. Social One has this great impact of connecting people, of bringing light to mental health, but it's also kind of played a part in it as well. What are your thoughts about that and how you've seen that, how social has played a role within mental health?
Yeah, social media is a double-edged sword. As you mentioned, there can be a lot of greatness in what social media can offer and really focus on raising awareness, of great organizations, of great mental health efforts. However, it can also lead to individuals isolating themselves in more what you might consider to be a virtual world. And in addition, I think a lot of times, if we get down to the nitty gritty of it, we all as individuals post what we want to post on social media. We post our best selves, typically speaking,
Yeah.
right? And it's very, very easy to get caught up in that comparison game. And so I think particularly social media is powerful, can be utilized for good. I think adults have to be honest with themselves and reflect on the amount of time they're spending on social media and how they're spending their time on social media. I encourage significant parental oversight and really not a lot of access to social media until at least like mid-teens or so, because we're just seeing, we're seeing bullying on another platform.
Right.
We're seeing some serious challenges there.
Your personal experience with your sister, and I'm curious to know, like, how has that for her in terms of, when she was initially going through that, as you guys were going through that as a family, what was available, and sort of seeing that now with patients who are diagnosed as bipolar, what has changed in terms of the treatment and the assistance that they're getting to have?
That's a great question. So when my sister was initially diagnosed, it was about, I would say, 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago. And there was less awareness at the time. And I think, we saw her particular access to services fluctuate over time. So my sister, very high functioning independent adult working at the Pentagon, and she lost that position, and her resources changed and her insurance coverage changed. And as soon as there were those implications, she had significantly less access to mental health services. And I think there was also a lot of challenge in knowing where to go to receive support and assistance to again reach those services. So, in the past 8 to 10 years, with greater awareness, with greater funding, we are making some positive changes in the, in the mental health field, as well as just overall integrated behavioral health within healthcare systems, to have better access, to have better quality of services. But we still have a ways to go. And in part, we need to really start providing more funding to the field of mental health, and to really salary our mental health providers well, because we are experiencing a lack of resources just due to lack of mental health providers. And there's still issues, particularly with patients who have Medicaid coverage, on finding access to mental health, because the reimbursement is so low. There's less providers available who are willing to see those patients. So it's improving, but we still have a ways to go in really recognizing how we can support the mental health field, mental health providers, and assure access to quality care for patients.
Whether it's a certain stigma, obviously that's around mental health, or it's a myth that could be furthest from the truth. I'm just curious to know, what are some of those most common ones that you experience, and how do you go about in addressing them?
I think as awareness has increased, there's less stigma around mental health needs and mental health care. However, I still see misconceptions of, what is healthy and what is not healthy. Oftentimes, I see these misconceptions in regards to relationships, and I think overall under recognition of what can be, psychological abuse and so forth. So I've certainly really seen just overall, misinformation, misconception about what healthy relationships look like, and really what healthy behaviors and healthy mindsets look like. There's certainly still what I would consider a lack of intentional program focus for specific ethnicities. I think that is an area that continues to need refining and a greater focus overall. And I think too, we need to make sure that our messaging is specific to some of these ethnic groups who are not receiving.
Very much agree with that.
Access or aware of access, or just not available. So I think that we need to identify what might be some of the stigma within these ethnic groups. Also understand the meaning of mental health and mental illness within these groups as well. Mm-hmm. So what is the meaning that they make of it? How can we approach them in a very aware manner, in a very kind of tailored approach is really, really important. And again, making sure that these particular regions have adequate resources. A lot of times this is where you'll find some of the least, funding, and that can be very challenging to entice mental health providers to be in those areas. So we need to see more equity overall.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, that of having like this tailored message. I am a first generation Hispanic woman, and mental health just wasn't talked about. It was, it wasn't like, let's go see a doctor. Let's kind of dive deeper into this. Or if I would have emotions where I'm just like, I feel like things are caving in. I can't breathe. I'm having, this sense of panic, not really knowing if it was a panic attack. But again, nothing. And it wasn't until I got older and I started living on my own. And, I would just be alone experiencing these things and just being like, this isn't right. And, then I introduced myself to therapy. And then I introduced myself to the possibility of, medication, introducing myself to, various, Facebook groups of other people going through the same thing. And it really is, I think about that, is there is such a difference between every household. There is how mental health is approached and discussed is so far between of what the next household is experiencing.
Absolutely. And listening to you share that, my mind went to, as a child, as an adolescent, you weren't provided the language to identify what you were experiencing. And that took, yeah, some growth and just evolving into an adult. And I think that we see that a lot within, certain ethnic populations where there's not the language around mental health. There's not the priority to discuss it, and to identify, what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, what you're thinking. And so it's crucial that that language is provided. And I think, one area that we can focus on more and more is the school systems and providing that psychoeducation, starting in elementary school about, mental health and incorporating that into the health classes so that there is more of that language provided and access to support if needed. Really, on a daily basis, I recommend gratitude. Gratitude, focusing on what you're grateful for, what you're thankful for, is shown to decrease symptoms of major depressive disorder. And so taking 3 to 5 minutes each day to either reflect or journal what you're thankful for can be significantly changing in how we process information, and truly can rewire our brains to focus on positive versus the negatives. Also, prioritizing, mental health and seeking mental health care via a therapist as needed is hugely important. And meditation can be very, very impactful for some people. And then lastly, taking time to ground yourself with nature, getting beyond city limits if you can, and spend time, hiking or at the beach or bike riding, because cognitively that will also have a positive effect, and again, just increase overall mental well-being. And then lastly, being mindful of who we surround ourselves by, and control over that can vary, particularly for our pediatric population, but being mindful of who we're surrounding ourselves with, and are we being lifted up by those in our closest social network? If we're not, do we need to make some changes there?
And also to be self-aware, to speak for myself, to be self-aware of the energy I'm giving off to people. Sometimes I'll catch myself and be like, wow, that seems to be like the 15th negative thing I've said in the last hour. Mm-hmm. How can we switch that? And so those are some great insights, and I know they're very valuable to our listeners. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Had a great conversation, and I'm sure everyone listening definitely learned something new. And so until next time, thanks for listening for Conversations Around the Table.